Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became a Saiyan raised on planet Vegeta? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the Genesis chamber was cold, sterile, and smelled of ozone and antiseptic fluid. It was a scent that clung to the very metal of the walls, a stark contrast to the scorched earth and iron-rich dust that defined the rest of planet Vegeta. Here, in the heart of the Saiyan birthing and assessment facility, there was an illusion of order, a place where the chaotic, brutal nature of their race was momentarily tamed and quantified. Inside a transparent cylindrical pod, a small boy floated in a viscous, nutrient-rich gel. His spiky, untamable hair, a shade of deep forest green so dark it was almost black, floated around his head like a strange, submerged crown. Large, emerald eyes, currently closed in a state of medically induced calm, were framed by a constellation of freckles that stood out against his pale skin. He was small, even for a Saiyan child of 5 cycles. His limbs were wiry rather than thick with the burgeoning muscle one expected. This was Deku. Outside the pod, 2 figures stood observing. They were Saiyans built in the traditional mold, broad-shouldered, scarred, and radiating an aura of impatient power. Their black eyes were sharp and critical, scanning the data slate one of them held. Vitals are stable. Neural activity is high. Unusually high. The first technician, a male named Tills, grumbled. His tail, wrapped tightly around his waist, twitched in irritation. High neural activity is useless without the power to back it up. The second, a female named Fascia, retorted, not looking up from her console. Begin the power level assessment. King Vegeta wants the latest batch of low-class whelps catalogued and assigned before the next planetary cycle. A low hum filled the chamber as energy conduits began to glow around Daiken's pod. The gel around him shimmered, and a faint, almost invisible aura began to coalesce around his small form. A scouter attached to the main console beeped to life, its lens focusing on the boy. Inside the pod, Daiken's eyes fluttered open. He wasn't groggy or disoriented. His mind, always racing, was already processing. Humming noise frequency is increasing. Ambient temperature of the gel is rising by 0.2 degrees per second. The light is a focused energy scan. Purpose, power level assessment. My first one. He felt a strange pressure building within him, a tingling sensation that started in his gut and spread to his fingertips. It wasn't a powerful, raging torrent like he'd sensed from the elite warriors who sometimes strode through the low-class districts. It was more like a flickering candle in a hurricane, a tiny, fragile spark. He tried to focus it, to push it outward as he'd seen others do in the training yards. He gritted his teeth, his small face scrunching in concentration. On the console, the scouter's readout began to climb. 5, 7, 9, Tills leaned in, a flicker of something other than boredom in his eyes. Maybe this one wouldn't be a complete waste. 10, 11, the number flashed, wavered, and then settled. 12, the hum ceased. The light faded. The room fell silent, save for the quiet hiss of the pod's life support. Fascia stared at the number on the screen. She blinked, then tapped the side of the scouter as if it were malfunctioning. 12? She said, her voice flat with disbelief. That can't be right. Run it again. Tills was already doing so. The process repeated. The hum, the light, the flickering numbers. The result was the same. Power level 12. A wave of palpable disgust washed over the room. Tills threw the data slate onto the console with a loud clatter. Genetic refuse. He spat. My son was born with a power level of 800. The prince was over 10,000. What is this flaw? It's a mockery. Fascia agreed, already marking Daiken's file with the designation for the lowest possible caste. He wouldn't even be assigned to an infiltration squad. He'd be a menial laborer, a technician's assistant, if he was lucky. A life of irrelevance and shame. The pod's seal hissed open, and the nutrient gel drained away, leaving Daiken shivering and dripping on the metal floor. The cold was a shock to his system. He stumbled, his legs weak, and caught himself on the side of the pod. His analytical mind was already working, trying to understand the result. 12. The average for a newborn is between 20 and 50. Low-class children are expected to reach at least 100 by age 5. My number is statistically insignificant. An outlier. Why? Get up, you worthless runt. Toz's voice was a whip crack. Before Daikon could respond, a softer presence entered the chamber. A woman with the same dark green hair as his, though hers was tamer, and the same gentle emerald eyes, currently filled with a fierce, protective anxiety. She was Nira, his mother. She rushed to his side, wrapping him in a coarse but warm blanket, ignoring the disdainful glares from the technicians. Is it done? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. It's done, Fascia said, her tone dripping with contempt. Congratulations, Nira. You've birthed the weakest Saiyan in a generation. Power level of 12. I've seen bigger numbers on a Senza bean. Nira flinched as if struck. She pulled Daikon closer, her arms a shield against the verbal blows. She looked down at her son, her heart aching. He wasn't looking at her. His wide, analytical eyes were fixed on the scouter, on the number 12 that still glowed on its screen. He wasn't crying. He was thinking. It was this trait, more than his weakness, that terrified her. In a world that valued instinct and fury, her son was a creature of contemplation. He's a late bloomer, she stammered, a desperate plea in her voice. His father was the same. Toz let out a short, barking laugh. His father was a low-class grunt who got himself killed on a subjugation mission because he hesitated. Sounds like the apple didn't fall far from the rotten tree. Get him out of here. He's contaminating the facility with his weakness. Nira's grip tightened on Daikon's shoulder. She bowed her head, a gesture of submission that was necessary for survival in the lower rungs of Saiyan society, and quickly guided her son out of the chamber. As they walked down the long, metallic corridor, Daikon finally spoke, his voice quiet and raspy. Mother, the energy converter on that machine, it's inefficient. The energy loss during the scan could be as high as 3%. Maybe my real power level is 13. Nira stopped and looked down at him, her expression a mixture of love and despair. Oh, my sweet, clever boy, she whispered, stroking his damp hair. That's not what matters here. But to Daikon, it was the only thing that mattered. Not the number itself, but the why of it. The variables. The mechanics. The data. Everything was data. The training yards of the low-class district were a vision of brutal chaos. The ground was a patchwork of cracked, reddish earth and deep craters from errant ki blasts. The air, thin and heavy under planet Vegeta's immense gravity, hummed with the energy of dozens of Saiyan children locked in fierce, often bloody, combat. There were no instructors supervising, no rules to speak of. The philosophy was simple. The strong survived and grew stronger, the weak were broken and discarded. It was natural selection in its most visceral form. Daikon sat on the edge of a large crater, a small, still figure in a sea of violent motion. He wasn't participating. He was observing. His knees were drawn up to his chest, and a stolen data pad rested on them. With a stylus, he was sketching, not pictures, but diagrams. Flow charts of movement, notations on energy expenditure, calculations on reaction times. He was watching a pair of boys, both significantly larger than him, locked in a brawl. One was a berserker, all raw power and wild swings. The other was faster, more agile, but his footwork was sloppy. Subject A relies on a 3-punch combination. Daikon muttered under his breath, his voice a low, rhythmic hum that was entirely his own. Right hook, left jab, overpowering right haymaker. Predictable. He overcommits on the haymaker, leaving his entire left flank exposed for approximately 0.7 seconds. Subject B is faster, but his evasive maneuvers are purely reactive. He doesn't anticipate. If he'd take a half-step left instead of a full step back, he'd be inside Subject A's guard. A low-powered ki blast to the knee joint would destabilize him, then an elbow to the solar plexus. Victory. His muttering was a constant, subconscious habit, the audible output of a mind that never stopped analyzing. To the other Saiyan children, it was just another mark of his strangeness, his weakness. They saw a boy too scared to fight, hiding in the corner and whispering nonsense to himself. His focus was so intense that he didn't notice the atmosphere in the yard shifting. The chaotic symphony of shouts and explosions began to quiet down, replaced by a tense, respectful silence. The brawling children stopped, their attention drawn to a figure who had just entered the yard. He walked with an arrogance that seemed to warp the very air around him. He was not much older than Deku, but he carried himself with the authority of a king. His hair was black and flamed upwards, his eyes were dark pits of pride, and his brow was perpetually furrowed in a look of regal disdain. He wore the armor of the royal family, a blue battle suit with white gloves and boots, a symbol of a status so far above the others it was almost mythical. Prince Vegeta had arrived, and he was followed by his hulking shadow, a much larger boy named Nappa. The other children parted before him, many bowing their heads in deference. Vegeta's eyes swept across the yard, a bored monarch surveying his pathetic subjects. His gaze eventually landed on the one anomaly in the scene of subservience, the small, green-haired boy sitting by the crater, still muttering to himself, completely oblivious to the prince's presence. The energy signature of his ki blasts is unstable, Deku whispered, scribbling furiously on his pad. Poor control. Wasted output. If he focused the energy into a smaller, denser point. What is that pathetic noise? The voice cut through Deku's concentration like a shard of glass. It was sharp, imperious, and laced with contempt. Deku looked up, his emerald eyes blinking in surprise. Prince Vegeta stood over him, casting a long shadow that swallowed him whole. Nappa loomed behind, a brutish grin on his face. Deku scrambled to his feet, clutching the datapad to his chest. He felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach, but his mind immediately kicked into analytical mode. Prince Vegeta, power level estimated to be in the thousands. Stance is relaxed but balanced, low center of gravity. Ready to spring in any direction. Arrogance is a potential weakness, but it's backed by overwhelming power. Direct confrontation is inadvisable. I asked you a question, garbage. Vegeta sneered, taking a step closer. Are you broken? What are you whispering about? Deku's instinct was to explain. To show him the data, the diagrams. To make him understand. I was just analyzing, he stammered, holding up the datapad slightly. Their fighting styles. They have flaws, wasted movements, inefficient energy. Vegeta stared at the pad, then back at Deku, and then he let out a laugh. It wasn't a sound of amusement. It was a cold, cruel sound. Analyzing? A true Saiyan warrior doesn't analyze. He feels. He fights. He conquers. You're not analyzing, you're cowering. You're making excuses for your own weakness. He snatched the datapad from Deku's hands. With a casual flex of his fingers, the device cracked and shattered, its screen going dark. The pieces fell to the dusty ground. Deku stared at the broken pad, his eyes wide with horror. All his work. All his observations. Gone. A lump formed in his throat. Tears welled in his eyes, blurring his vision. They weren't just tears of fear, but of profound frustration. Look at it, Nappa, Vegeta said, gesturing to Deku with a sweep of his hand. It's crying. Crying over a broken toy. Are you even a Saiyan? The other children, who had been watching from a distance, began to snicker. The sound was like 1,000 tiny needles against Deku's skin. He clenched his fists, the tears now streaming freely down his cheeks. Give it back, he whispered, his voice choked. Give what back? Vegeta taunted, kicking one of the broken pieces. This trash? It's where it belongs. Just like you. Something inside Deku snapped. It wasn't the famed Saiyan rage, not the explosive fury that could level mountains. It was a different kind of fire, the desperate, defiant will of a cornered animal protecting its very essence. All his analysis, all his theories screamed at him that this was suicide. But his heart, the heroic spirit he didn't even know he possessed, told him he had to stand up. With a choked sob that turned into a yell, he lunged forward. It wasn't even a fight. Deku tried to apply his theories. He aimed for Vegeta's side, the opening he knew should be there after a taunt. But the prince's speed was something his data couldn't prepare him for. Vegeta didn't even seem to move. One moment Deku was charging, The next an iron-hard fist was buried in his stomach. The air rushed out of his lungs in a painful gasp. The world tilted, the red sun of Vegeta spinning in his vision. He fell to his knees, clutching his stomach, coughing and gagging. Impact force, incredible, his mind sputtered, even through the agony. Speed, impossible to track with the naked eye. He didn't even power up. Vegeta looked down at him, his expression one of utter boredom. Pathetic. He delivered a sharp kick to Daikin's ribs. A sickening crack echoed in the quiet yard. Daikin cried out, collapsing onto his side, curling into a ball. The pain was a white-hot fire, but beneath it, his brain was still working, cataloging the experience. Force of the kick was localized, precise. Not a wild swing. He has exceptional control. His movements are perfect. No wasted energy. He's the ideal. Vegeta watched the small boy twitching on the ground, a fresh wave of disgust rising in him. It wasn't just the weakness that offended him, it was the entire package. The muttering, the analyzing, the crying, it was an affront to everything a Saiyan, and especially a prince, was meant to be. He looked at the boy's name, Daikin, which he knew could be read in a different way. A useless puppet. A wooden doll. A good-for-nothing. You know, Vegeta said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Your name, Daikin, you can read it another way. Deku. A Dekunabu. Someone who can't do anything. Who is utterly useless, he smirked, the cruel nickname tasting perfect on his tongue. That's what you are. A weak, crying, useless Deku. The other children seized upon it, their laughter growing louder. Deku! Deku! Useless Deku! They chanted. The name echoed in Daikin's ears, each repetition a fresh blow. He lay in the dust, broken and humiliated, the taste of blood and dirt in his mouth. Vegeta gave him one last look of contempt before turning and striding away, his royal duty of tormenting the weak apparently fulfilled for the day. Nappa followed, laughing boisterously. Slowly, painfully, Daikin pushed himself up. His ribs screamed in protest, and every breath was a struggle. The other children, their amusement over, went back to their own brawls, leaving him alone in the dust with the shattered remains of his datapad. He wasn't crying anymore. The pain was secondary. The humiliation was a dull ache. The primary emotion churning in his gut was a cold, hard frustration. It wasn't the frustration of losing a fight he knew he couldn't win. It was the frustration of incomplete data. He had experienced Vegeta's power firsthand. He had felt the speed, the precision, the force. And his mind was already replaying the brief, brutal encounter, slowing it down, analyzing every microsecond. His initial stance shift was 0.02 seconds before the punch. The fist rotated at the last moment to maximize impact. The kick wasn't aimed at a vital point, but at a structurally weak one, the floating rib. It was a disabling blow, not a killing one. It was deliberate. Practiced. Perfect. He had lost, but he had learned. The walk back to his small, block-like dwelling in the lowest sector of the Saiyan capital was a slow, agonizing journey. The architecture here was brutalist and functional, dark, unadorned metal and stone, built to withstand stray energy blasts rather than to inspire comfort. It was a world of sharp angles and oppressive shadows. He limped through the door, trying to hide his injuries, but Nera saw them instantly. Her face, already etched with worry, crumpled in anguish. Daikin! What happened? She cried, rushing to him and helping him to a small cot in the corner of their single room. I fell. He lied, his voice weak. It was a practiced lie, one he used often. She knew he was lying. She could see the perfectly fist-shaped bruise forming on his stomach, the telltale signs of a one-sided beating. She gently prodded his side, and he winced, letting out a sharp hiss of pain. A broken rib, she murmured, her hands glowing with a faint, green energy. She was no elite healer, but she had a rudimentary knowledge of key-based first aid, enough to soothe the pain and encourage the rapid Saiyan healing process. Was it the prince again? Daikin didn't answer. He just stared at the ceiling, the chant of Deku, Deku, Deku still ringing in his head. Nera sighed, the sound heavy with a mother's helpless sorrow. She sat beside him, stroking his forehead. My son, she said softly. This world, it wasn't made for gentle souls. You are so smart, so observant, but here, that is seen as a weakness. Why don't you just fight back? Unleash your anger? You are a Saiyan. The power is in your blood. He turned his head to look at her, his emerald eyes burning with an intensity she had never seen before. My anger is useless, he said, his voice quiet but firm. My power level is 12. Raging with the power of a flickering candle won't stop a storm. But a candle can show you the way in the dark. Neera didn't understand. She saw his brilliance, but she couldn't comprehend how it could ever translate to survival here. She just wanted her son to be safe, and on planet Vegeta, safety was synonymous with power. Later that night, long after Neera had fallen into a troubled sleep, Deku slipped out of his cot. His ribs still ached, but his mind was on fire. The loss of his datapad was a critical blow, but the information he had gained was priceless. He couldn't let it fade. He rummaged through a refuse pile behind their dwelling, a place where discarded technology and broken equipment were left to rust. His eyes scanned the junk with analytical precision. He wasn't looking for anything valuable. He was looking for something functional. His fingers closed around it. A small, palm-sized maintenance data slate, its screen cracked but still functional. It was an old model, discarded by a technician, but its memory banks were empty. It was perfect. He snuck back inside, his movements silent. Huddled in the corner of the room, the faint glow of the cracked screen illuminated his small, determined face. The pain in his body was a constant, sharp reminder of his weakness. The nickname, Deku, was a brand on his soul. But he wouldn't let them define him. He activated the stylus. His hands, though small and bruised, moved with a steady, deliberate purpose. He didn't write words at first. He drew a stick figure in a fighting stance. He meticulously diagrammed Vegeta's posture, annotating it with notes in the margins. Stance wide, stable. Weight distributed 50-50. Allows for explosive movement in any direction. Weakness. A low sweep could be effective if timed perfectly, but requires far greater speed than currently achievable. He drew arrows indicating Vegeta's attack vectors, calculated the speed, estimated the power output. He logged every detail of his humiliation, not as a memory of defeat, but as a collection of raw, invaluable data. He worked for hours, the world outside fading away, leaving only him, the glowing screen, and his relentless analysis. He was building a weapon. Not one of ki or muscle, but of information. Knowledge was his power. Analysis was his training. At the top of the first page, he wrote a title. Not with despair or resentment, but with a cold, clear sense of purpose. Warrior Analysis for the Future Volume 1, and below that, the subject of his very first entry, Prince Vegeta. He looked at the broken, useless nickname that had been forced upon him. Deku. He thought about what Vegeta had said. Someone who can't do anything. A flicker of defiance sparked in his chest. He's wrong, Deku thought, a silent vow echoing in the chambers of his mind. He's wrong. I can do something. I can understand. I can learn. I can adapt. He clenched his small fist, the glow of the data slate reflected in his determined green eyes. The pain in his ribs was a dull throb. The ridicule of his peers was a distant echo. All that mattered was the path forward, a path no Saiyan had ever walked. He whispered the words into the darkness, a promise to himself and a challenge to the universe that had made him so weak. I will get stronger. Not like you. My own way. The low-class youth training facility was a cavern of echoing noise and the sharp, metallic tang of sweat. Unlike the unstructured brutality of the outdoor yards, this was where Saiyan children were formally broken and reshaped into warriors. The methods were crude, direct, and ruthlessly efficient, designed to cull the weak and temper the strong through constant, unforgiving pressure. Today's lesson was on hand-to-hand combat under increased gravity. The chamber's gravity generators were humming at 5 times planet Vegeta's already immense standard, pressing down on the children with the weight of a small moon. Most gritted their teeth and bore it, their innate Saiyan resilience allowing them to move, albeit sluggishly. Deku, however, felt as though he were moving through setting concrete. His small frame, lacking the dense muscle mass of his peers, struggled profoundly. Every step was a monumental effort. Every punch was a slow, telegraphed arc. Again! Bellowed the instructor, a thick-necked, scar-faced scion named Borgas. His tail lashed the air behind him like an irritated python. Pair up! First one to knock their opponent out of the ring wins. No ki blasts, just pure strength. This drill teaches you to fight when your energy is depleted. Now fight! The children roared and crashed into each other. Daikin was paired with a burly, dim-witted boy named Turin, whose power level was a solid, if unspectacular, 250. Next to Daikin's 12, it was a chasm. Turin grinned, cracking his knuckles. Ready to get squashed, Deku? Daikin didn't respond. His mind was a whirlwind of calculations. Gravity at 50 g. My body mass is 28 kilograms. Effective weight is 1,400 kilograms. Turin's mass is approximately 45 kilograms, effective weight 2250. His center of gravity is high. His stance is too wide, unbalanced. He favors his right side. He saw a path to victory. It was a narrow, treacherous path, but it was there. He wouldn't win with power. He would win with physics. Fight! Borgas roared again. Turin charged, a clumsy, straightforward bull rush. It was exactly what Daikin predicted. Instead of trying to meet the force head-on, Daikin dropped. He fell flat to the metal floor, the impact jarring his bones even through the intense gravity. Turin, expecting resistance, had put all his momentum into the charge. With nothing to hit, he stumbled forward, his balance broken. This was Daikin's opening. In that split second, he coiled his legs and pushed off the floor, not aiming for Turin's torso, but for his ankle. He drove his shoulder into the side of Turin's boot. It was a perfect leverage point. Turin yelped in surprise as his foot was swept out from under him. He pinwheeled his arms, his massive effective weight making his fall catastrophically clumsy. He crashed to the ground with a thunderous clang that echoed through the chamber. Daikin was already moving, scrambling on all fours. The gravity made it impossible to stand quickly. He had a 1.2-second window before Turin could recover. His target was the edge of the ring, a mere 3 meters away. He never made it. A massive hand clamped down on the back of his battle tunic, lifting him effortlessly into the air. He dangled, kicking feebly, as Instructor Borgas held him up for inspection. What, in the name of the sacred Ozuru, was that? Borgas growled, his face inches from Daikin's. A tactical maneuver. Daikin squeaked out, the pressure of the grip making it hard to breathe. I used his momentum against him to create an imbalance. Tactics? Borgas scoffed, shaking him like a rag doll. That wasn't tactics. That was groveling. You fell on the floor like a coward. A Saiyan meets his enemy on his feet. He overpowers him. He does not trip him like a common trickster. He turned to Turin, who was now lumbering back to his feet, looking more confused than angry. Turin! You let this insect put you on the ground. You are a disgrace. Finish him. Now. The right way. Borgas dropped Daikin, who landed in a heap. Turin, spurred by the instructor's fury, let out a guttural roar. This time there was no clumsy charge. He simply brought his massive fist down. Daikin saw it coming. He analyzed the trajectory, the speed, the force. He knew he should roll left. His mind commanded his body to move, but the crushing gravity held him fast. The punch landed squarely on his back, driving the air from his lungs and sending a starburst of agony through his entire being. The world went dark for a moment. When his vision returned, he was outside the ring, his body screaming in protest. Pathetic. Borgas spat, not even glancing at him. Weakness of the body is a flaw. Weakness of the spirit is a disease. Get him out of my sight. 2 other children, jeering, dragged Daikin out of the chamber and dumped him in the corridor. He lay there, tasting blood, his mind replaying his failure. The theory was sound. The execution was flawed. My body could not keep up with my mind under these conditions. I need to account for physiological limitations in my strategies. More data is required. He pushed himself up, every muscle protesting. His fight was over, but his training for the day was not. There was one place where his body's weakness was irrelevant. The strategy simulation chamber was the one piece of truly advanced technology in the low-class facility. It was a vast, spherical room, its walls a seamless, matte black surface. When active, holographic projectors could replicate any environment, any enemy, with chilling realism. Here, battles were won with tactics, not power levels. The system equalized the physical attributes of the users, making it a pure test of strategic acumen. Most Saiyan children hated it. They found it boring and confusing. For Deku, it was a sanctuary. He entered the chamber, and was greeted by a different instructor. This one, a female Saiyan named Cress, was leaner than Borgus, with sharp, intelligent eyes. She valued efficiency over brute force, though she still held the core Saiyan belief that overwhelming power was the ultimate solution. Deku, she said, her tone neutral as she looked at her data pad. You've been ejected from physical conditioning. Again. Let me guess, Borgus found your methods unorthodox. He called them cowardly. Deku corrected, his voice quiet as he stepped onto the central platform. Cress permitted herself a small, dry smile. Of course he did. Well, cowardice has no place in my simulations either. But neither does stupidity. Let's see if that brain of yours can make up for your complete lack of fighting spirit. She tapped her data pad. Scenario 7B, the needle in the fortress. You will command a simulated 4-person squad. Objective, infiltrate a fortified enemy command center on planet Jurai and retrieve vital intelligence. The fortress is guarded by 500 Jurian soldiers, power level 800 each, and one elite commander, power level 4000. Your squad's power levels are simulated at 500 each. Direct engagement is suicide. You have 1 hour. Begin. The black walls shimmered and dissolved. Deku was suddenly standing on a rocky outcrop overlooking a massive, alien fortress. The sky was a sickly green, and 2 moons hung in the twilight. 3 holographic squad mates materialized beside him, their faces blank but their forms solid. For any other Saiyan child, the command would be simple: find the weakest point in the wall and blast their way through, hoping to reach the objective before being overwhelmed. It was a strategy with a 99% failure rate. Deku didn't even look at the fortress walls. He looked at the terrain. He looked at the patrol patterns of the holographic guards. He looked at the wind direction, indicated by the swaying of alien flora. Squad, he began, his voice taking on a quiet confidence he never showed in the real world. Delta, you will proceed to Grid 7. There is a geothermal vent there. Plant this explosive charge. Do not detonate. Wait for my signal. A holographic charge appeared in his squadmate's hands. Gamma, you will take up a sniper position on that ridge. Your target is not a person, but the primary power conduit for the fortress's eastern floodlights. Again, wait for my signal. Beta, you're with me. We're going down to the sewer grate. Cress, watching from her monitor in the control room, raised an eyebrow. The sewer grate was a known entry point, but it was always heavily trapped and monitored. A fool's gambit. For 20 minutes, Deku's simulated team moved like ghosts. He navigated them through the fortress's underbelly, not by fighting the guards, but by tracking their movements and slipping through the gaps. He used his own avatar to toss a rock down a side tunnel, creating a noise that drew a patrol away from their path. It was a child's trick, but in the context of Saiyan military strategy, it was revolutionary. They reached the central data spire, but the elite commander was there, guarding it personally. A 4-on-1 fight was still unwinnable. Delta, now! Deku commanded. Miles away, the holographic charge detonated. The geothermal vent erupted in a massive, spectacular plume of steam and fire. Alarms blared across the fortress. The commander, distracted, turned towards the chaos. Gamma, now! The sniper shot rang out. The eastern floodlights flickered and died, plunging a huge section of the fortress into darkness and confusion. The commander cursed and tapped his communicator, diverting troops to the 2 separate incidents. His attention was completely divided. Beta, now! Deku whispered. While the commander was distracted, Deku and his last squad mate didn't attack him. They ran. They sprinted past the powerful enemy, grabbed the holographic data chip from the console, and fled back into the sewer system. The simulation ended. The fortress dissolved back into black walls. A series of numbers flashed on the main screen. Mission successful. Time elapsed 28:14. Saiyan casualties 0. Enemy engagements 3 non-lethal. Overall efficiency rating 98.7%. Cress stared at the screen. The facility record for this scenario was a 45% efficiency rating, achieved by an elite child who had simply powered through to the objective, losing 3 of his 4 simulated squadmates in the process. Daikin's score was impossible. How? She asked, her voice betraying a sliver of genuine curiosity. The objective was to retrieve the intelligence, not to defeat the enemy. Daikin explained, stepping off the platform. The guards were a variable to be managed, not an obstacle to be destroyed. Creating 2 simultaneous, distant threats forced the commander to divide his attention and resources, creating a momentary opening. The most efficient path to victory was to avoid fighting altogether. Cress was silent for a long moment. She looked at the score, then at the small, unassuming boy before her. Everything he said was logical, tactically brilliant even. But it was so profoundly un-Saiyan. Your methods are peculiar, she finally said, her professional mask slipping back into place. But the results are undeniable. You have an analytical mind that is unusual. A waste that it is paired with such a pitifully weak body. She marked his score on her pad, a flicker of something. Was it respect? Or just confusion, in her eyes? Dismissed. Daikin bowed his head and left the chamber, the instructor's backhanded compliment ringing in his ears. He didn't care. He had won. He had proven, if only to himself and in a simulated world, that his way worked. As he walked through the capital, away from the training facilities, Daikin sought out the places where real power congregated. He wasn't drawn to the glory, but to the data. His new data slate, salvaged and carefully maintained, was always with him, tucked into his armor. He found himself near one of the primary launch pads for off-world missions. A crowd had gathered, a low murmur of excitement rippling through them. A ship had just returned, scarred and pitted from atmospheric entry. The ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, and out strode a team of 5 Saiyans. They were battered, their armor cracked, but they walked with the swagger of conquerors. Their leader was a man with a distinctive scar on his cheek and wild, spiky black hair. His power radiated from him in palpable waves, a chaotic, untamed energy that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Daikin recognized him instantly from the warrior registries. Bardock. A low-class warrior who had clawed his way into the upper echelons of the Saiyan military through sheer ferocity, and an astonishingly high power level. He was a legend among the lower castes. Daikin slipped behind a stack of cargo containers, his eyes wide with analytical fervor. He activated his slate, his fingers flying across the screen. Bardock's team was laughing, recounting their mission. Did you see the way their leader's face looked when I blasted him? Tora, a tall member of the squad, boomed. He was begging for mercy, laughed Fascia, the same woman who had mocked Daikin at his birth assessment. Pathetic, Bardock just grunted, a bloody grin on his face. They were tougher than the last batch. Barely worth the effort to wipe out. Daikin watched, his mind dissecting everything he saw and heard. Subject: Bardock's squad. Mission debrief analysis. Observation 1. Overwhelming reliance on individual power. His slate recorded. Their strategy appears to be a simple seek and destroy, targeting the strongest opponents first. No evidence of coordinated tactics or environmental utilization. He watched as a medic droid approached Bardock, trying to skin a deep gash on his arm. Bardock shoved it away. Get that thing away from me. It's just a scratch. Observation 2. Pride as a critical vulnerability. Daikin noted. Subject: Bardock refuses medical attention for a significant injury, viewing it as a sign of weakness. In a prolonged conflict, this could lead to decreased combat effectiveness or infection. The entire squad displays similar arrogance, taunting fallen enemies and taking unnecessary damage to prove their durability. This is tactically unsound. He focused on Bardock's energy signature. It was immense, a raging bonfire compared to Daikin's flickering candle. But as he looked closer, he saw the flaws. Observation 3. Inefficient key control. He scribbled. Bardock's aura is in a constant state of flux. He's leaking energy, a constant, low-level drain on his reserves. His ki blasts, while devastating, are wide-beamed and unfocused. A significant percentage of energy is wasted on collateral damage rather than being focused on the target. If he could learn to compress that same amount of energy into a needlepoint beam, its penetrative power would increase exponentially with no additional power cost. Bardock, as if sensing he was being watched, suddenly turned his head. His dark, battle-hardened eyes swept across the area and, for a fleeting second, locked onto Daikin's. Daikin froze, his heart hammering in his chest. It felt like being pinned by the gaze of a predator. There was no recognition in Bardock's eyes, just a brief, dismissive glance at the small, strange child hiding behind the crates. Then he turned away, clapping his teammate on the back and heading towards the mess hall. The moment was over. Daikin let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His hands were trembling, but not from fear. It was the thrill of discovery. He had just analyzed one of the most powerful low-class warriors alive and found him wanting. Not in power, but in potential. Bardock was a sharpened club, brutally effective but crude. Daikin could see, with absolute clarity, how he could be forged into a scalpel. It was a dangerous, exhilarating thought. The shadow of Lord Frisia was a permanent fixture on planet Vegeta, a silent, oppressive weight on the Saiyan spirit. His galleon-like ship often hung in the violet sky, a constant reminder of who truly held the power in the universe. Most Saiyans, blinded by their own pride, saw the arrangement as a partnership. They were Frisia's elite shock troops, the mightiest warriors in his army. They served him, but they were not slaves. Daikin knew better. His analytical mind, free from the constraints of Saiyan pride, saw the relationship for what it was, a master and his attack dogs. His suspicions were confirmed one evening as he was exploring the perimeters of the Royal District, a place low-class children were forbidden to go. He was looking for discarded high-end tech, anything that could give him an edge. He moved through the shadows, a ghost in the alien city. He heard voices from an opulent balcony overlooking a courtyard. Peeking through the ornate railings, he saw a sight that made his blood run cold. King Vegeta, the proud ruler of the Saiyan race, was standing before two of Frisia's top lieutenants, the effete, blue-skinned Zarbon and the brutish, pink-skinned Dodoria. Daikin immediately dropped into a crouch, pressing himself against the wall. He couldn't hear everything, but snippets of the conversation drifted down to him. Pleased with the subjugation of planet Kanasa, Zarbon was saying, his voice smooth and condescending. Lord Frisia commends your monkeys on their enthusiasm. Daikin's eyes narrowed. He wasn't just listening to the words, he was analyzing the nonverbal cues. Zarbon's posture was utterly relaxed, one hand resting casually on his hip. Dodoria was picking something from his teeth, looking bored. They displayed zero deference, zero respect. They were speaking to a subordinate. King Vegeta's posture, by contrast, was a study in tension. His back was ramrod straight, his fists clenched at his sides, his tail unnaturally still. Daikin knew from his observations that a still tail on a Saiyan was a sign of extreme emotional suppression. The king was radiating fury, but he was choking it down, forcing a mask of regal calm onto his face. The Saiyans are honored to serve the mighty Lord Frisia, the king said, his voice tight. See that you remember that honor. Dodoria chimed in with a crude laugh. Lord Frisia's been getting a little nervous about all these stories he hears. Saiyans getting stronger. Whispers of some Super Saiyan fairy tale. He wouldn't want his favorite pets getting rabies, now would he? The threat, veiled as it was, hung in the air, thick and poisonous. A Super Saiyan. Daikin had heard the legends, stories told to children. A golden warrior of immense power, the stuff of myth. To Frisia's men, it was clearly a source of paranoia. Zarbon waved a dismissive hand. Pay no attention to Dodoria's brutishness, your majesty. All Lord Frisia asks is your continued loyalty, and of course, a detailed report on any warrior whose power level begins to approach a problematic threshold. We wouldn't want anyone getting delusions of grandeur, would we? King Vegeta gave a stiff, jerky nod. Of course. I will personally monitor my people. The conversation ended soon after. Zarbon and Dodoria departed, leaving the king alone on the balcony. For a long moment, King Vegeta stood motionless. Then, with a guttural roar of pure, unadulterated rage, he slammed his fist into the stone railing, shattering it into pieces. His power flared violently, shaking the very foundations of the palace before he suppressed it just as quickly, his shoulders slumping in a rare, fleeting moment of defeat. Hiding below, Deku processed the new data with chilling clarity. Conclusion 1. The Saiyan/Frisia alliance is a lie. It is a relationship of subjugation. Frisia fears the Saiyan's potential growth. Conclusion 2. The legend of the Super Saiyan is a key factor in this fear. Frisia is actively monitoring and suppressing Saiyan power levels through King Vegeta. Conclusion 3. The Scouters, Frisia's great gift to the Saiyans, are the primary tool for this monitoring. They are not just communication devices, they are tracking collars. The pieces clicked into place, forming a terrifying picture. The Saiyans believed they were on a leash, but Deku could see that they were in a cage, and the door was slowly closing. Their pride was the lock. They were so busy trying to prove their strength to their master that they couldn't see he was sharpening the knife to put them down. He crept away from the palace, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He clutched his data slate, its screen dark, its memory full of his dangerous scribbles. In one hand, he held his own analysis, his own path. On the faces of every Saiyan he passed, he saw the ubiquitous Scouter, Frisia's symbol of control. Scribbles and Scouters. His mind versus their machine. His awareness versus their blindness. He was a low-class anomaly, a statistical error with a power level of 12. But in that moment, Deku understood a truth that even the mighty Prince Vegeta and the legendary Bardock could not grasp. In this world of monsters and gods, the most dangerous weapon was not a planet-shattering energy blast. It was the truth. And he was the only one who seemed to be looking for it. The years between Deku's humiliation in the training yard and his 18th cycle were a grueling exercise in duality. To the brutal, dismissive world of Saiyan society, he was an invisible failure. Deku, the useless one, a low-class runt with a power level that had barely crawled into the triple digits. A walking cautionary tale, whose only notable skills were muttering and scribbling on a data slate. He was a ghost in the machine, consistently finishing last in physical drills and first in strategic simulations, a paradox that instructors found easier to ignore than to understand. But in the shadows, in the quiet solitude of his mind and the flickering light of his slate, Deku was forging himself into something unprecedented. His warrior analysis for the future had grown from a single volume into a comprehensive library. He had dissected the fighting styles of every warrior of note, from Bardock's raw ferocity to Vegeta's cruel perfection. He had filled pages with theoretical physics, key flow diagrams, and anatomical weak points of dozens of alien species catalogued in the Frisia Force database. He had developed a new form of training for himself, one focused not on explosive power, but on endurance, precision, and key control. He practiced by trying to levitate a single pebble for hours, an exercise in focus that other Saiyans would have found maddeningly tedious. His power level remained pitifully low, but the control he had over that meager power was absolute. His 18th cycle brought with it an unavoidable rite of passage, his first off-world assignment. It was the final, brutal test for every low-class Saiyan. They were thrown into the galactic grinder, and those who survived came back as hardened killers, their place in the Saiyan military machine cemented. Those who didn't were forgotten. The assignment was delivered by a stony-faced administrative officer in a sterile, gray briefing room. The air was cold and smelled of recycled oxygen. Deku stood at attention, his posture perfect, his face an unreadable mask. He was not alone. 3 other Saiyans, his newly assigned squadmates, stood with him. They were, he quickly analyzed, the dregs. A collection of misfits and problem children deemed unworthy of a proper squad. The leader, a hulking Saiyan named Zucchini, stood with his arms crossed, a permanent sneer etched onto his face. His power level was respectable for a low-class warrior, likely around 1,500, but his energy signature was chaotic and uncontrolled. He radiated impatience and a deep-seated resentment, likely at being assigned to lead such a pathetic team. His eyes flickered over Deku, and the sneer deepened. To Zucchini's left stood Lika. She was lean and wiry, her body coiled with nervous energy. Her specialty was speed, and her arrogance was almost as potent as the prince's. She kept tapping her foot, her sharp eyes darting around the room as if everything in it was beneath her notice. She saw the mission, the squad, and especially Daikon, as an insult to her talents. The final member was a girl named Pumpkin. She was broad-shouldered and possessed a decent power level, but she projected an aura of profound anxiety. She nervously fiddled with the strap of her armor, her eyes wide and unfocused. Daikon's analysis suggested a lack of confidence, a spirit ill-suited to the casual brutality of their race. She was strong, but she didn't have the will of a killer. Squad 734. The officer droned, his voice devoid of emotion. Your assignment is Planet C-53, located in the outer rim of the Zilosian Quadrant. Standard pacification mission. A holographic star map shimmered into existence, highlighting a small, green and blue planet. Intelligence reports the indigenous population, designated Sylvans, to be a primitive, pre-spaceflight civilization. Power levels are negligible. The planet's biosphere is rich in Yggdrasil crystals, a low-grade energy source Frisia Force has deemed profitable for extraction. The officer paused. Your objective is total eradication of the native sentient life forms. Prepare the planet for the arrival of the extraction crews. The mission is rated Class D, simple. Do not fail. Zucchini slammed a fist into his palm. Heh. A bug hunt. Finally, a chance to stretch my legs. We'll have this planet cleared in a day. Try an hour. Lika scoffed, not looking at him. Anything longer would be an embarrassment. Daikon remained silent, his eyes narrowed, absorbing the data from the holographic display. Planet C-53. Gravity, 0.8 of Vegeta standard. Atmosphere, high oxygen content. Population, estimated 20 million Sylvans. Frisia valuation, low priority. The order is eradication, not subjugation. Why? Eradication is energy intensive. A subjugated workforce could harvest the crystals themselves. It's inefficient. Any questions? The officer asked, already looking bored. Yeah. Zucchini grunted, pointing a thumb at Daikon. What's he for? Is he supposed to bore the bugs to death with his muttering? The officer glanced at Daikon's file on his datapad. Daikon. Power level, 124. Special aptitude, tactical analysis. According to his simulation scores, his strategic planning is exceptional. You will follow his plans where applicable. Zucchini and Lika both let out a short, incredulous laugh. Pumpkin just looked at Daikon with a mixture of pity and confusion. You want me to take orders from Deku? Zucchini snarled. I'd rather take orders from a Cyberman. We won't need any of his pathetic plans. We have power. That's the only plan a Saiyan needs. The officer's expression didn't change. Your squad, your command, Zucchini. Just complete the objective. Dismissed. The journey to Planet C-53 took 3 days in the cramped, metallic confines of their spherical attack ball pod. The space was barely large enough for the 4 of them, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. Zucchini spent his time boasting about his power, recounting exaggerated tales of his triumphs in the training yards. Lika sat in a corner, eyes closed, seemingly meditating but actually radiating waves of contempt for her companions. Pumpkin obsessively rechecked her armor and scouter, her nervous energy a constant, low hum. Daikon sat apart from them all, his salvage data slate on his lap. He ignored their chatter, his mind focused entirely on the mission. He reviewed the sparse data on the Sylvans again and again. Bipedal, humanoid, silicon-based life. No records of technology, warfare, or even a centralized government. They were described as a nomadic, communal species. It didn't add up. Eradication was pest control. This felt more like an execution, and an inefficient one at that. On the second day, he decided to try. Zucchini, he said, his voice calm and even. The large Saiyan grunted, not bothering to look at him. What do you want, Deku? I have analyzed the mission parameters and cross-referenced them with 17 similar Frisia Force pacification reports. Daikon began, his voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of his analytical mutter. The order for total eradication on a planet with harvestable resources is a tactical anomaly. It suggests the indigenous population possesses a trait that makes them unsuitable for subjugation. Given their lack of technology or recorded aggression, I theorize this trait is non-combative. Perhaps a psychic hive mind, or a biological defense that renders them toxic upon death. A frontal assault, as you seem to be planning, could trigger such a defense and complicate the mission, or even endanger us. Lika opened one eye. What are you babbling about? I am proposing an alternative strategy. Daikin continued undeterred. Phase 1, Reconnaissance. I will go in alone, cloaking my power level, to observe the Sylvans and ascertain the reason for the eradication order. Phase 2, Surgical Strike. Once the nature of their society is understood, we identify the linchpin, a queen, a central consciousness, a spawning ground, and neutralize it with a single, coordinated attack. The result is the same, the end of their civilization, but it would be achieved with minimal energy expenditure and a near-zero risk factor. There was a moment of stunned silence in the pod. Pumpkin was staring at him, her anxious expression replaced by one of genuine surprise. His plan was logical. It sounded smart. Zucchini turned to face him, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across his face. Let me get this straight. Your master plan is for you to go in first, because you're a coward who's trying to find a way to win this fight without actually fighting. It is not about cowardice, it is about efficiency. Daikin countered. Why use a sledgehammer to kill a fly when a fly swatter is more effective? Because we're Saiyans! Zucchini roared, his voice booming in the small space. He lunged across the pod and grabbed Daikin by the front of his armor, lifting him off his seat. We are the sledgehammer, that's the entire point. We show up, we smash everything, we leave. It's what we do. It's what makes us strong. Your way of thinking is a disease. It's weak. When we land, you will do exactly as I say. You will power up, you will point your hands at whatever is in front of you, and you will make it go away. Understand? He shoved Daikin back into his seat. The impact rattled Daikin's teeth, but his expression remained unchanged. He simply adjusted his armor and looked back down at his slate. Initial hypothesis rejected by squad leader. Primary motivation appears to be a combination of pride and adherence to traditional Saiyan combat doctrine. Emotional response supersedes tactical logic. Probability of plan adoption, 0%. Lika snorted. He really is useless. Pumpkin looked away, her brief flicker of admiration extinguished by Zucchini's brutish dominance. The rest of the journey passed in a heavy, hostile silence. The attack ball pierced the upper atmosphere of C-53 like a falling star. Daikin watched the planet grow on the main view screen. It was a jewel of vibrant green continents and shimmering, turquoise oceans. There were no signs of industrial pollution, no sprawling cities, just a world teeming with what looked like pristine, untouched life. It was, he noted with a detached part of his mind, beautiful, a stark contrast to the scorched, red rock wasteland of his homeworld. The pod landed with a heavy thud in the center of a vast, alien forest. The trees were colossal, their trunks glowing with a soft, internal bioluminescence. The air that filtered in after the hatch hissed open was thick with the scent of unknown blossoms and damp earth. Strange, melodious bird calls echoed in the canopy above. Zucchini stepped out first, taking a deep breath and cracking his knuckles. Smells like victory. All right, squad, listen up. We start here. We move north. Anything that moves, you kill it. Anything that doesn't move, you kill it anyway, just in case. Lika, you take the skies, give us some aerial support. Pumpkin, you're with me. Deku, try not to get stepped on. Before they could move, however, figures began to emerge from between the giant, glowing trees. They were the Sylvans. They were tall, slender beings, their skin the color of polished mahogany, interwoven with faint, glowing green lines that pulsed with a soft light, like veins of liquid emerald. They had large, dark, empathetic eyes and no discernible mouths. They wore no clothes, no armor, no weapons. They simply were. And they were not afraid. They moved towards the four armored aliens who had just crashed into their home with a sense of serene curiosity. Well, look at that! Zucchini chuckled, his scouter beeping as it registered their power levels. Barely a 5. This is going to be even easier than I thought. Let's get this over with. I'm hungry. He began to power up, a red aura flaring around him, kicking up dust and leaves. The Sylvans stopped, their internal lights pulsing a little faster. They didn't retreat. They didn't raise their fists. They simply stood and watched, a silent, peaceful assembly. Then, something strange happened. Daikon felt a sensation. It wasn't a sound, or a sight. It was a feeling, a gentle pressure against his mind. It was a wave of pure, undiluted emotion. Curiosity. Welcome. Questions. Who are you? Why are you here? It was them. They were communicating, not with words, but with feelings. It was a psychic link, a gentle, open broadcast. He realized instantly why the eradication order had been given. A species that could communicate telepathically could not be lied to, could not be intimidated into servitude, could not be broken by conventional means. To Frisia's empire, a race that could project the truth was a fundamental threat to its control. He also felt something else. A profound sense of peace emanating from them, a connection to the vibrant life of the planet around them. They were one with the forest, with the land, with the very air. To kill them would be to kill the planet itself. Stop, Daikon said, his voice quiet but firm. Zucchini's aura flickered in annoyance. What did you say? They are telepathic. Daikon explained, his mind racing. He had to reframe his argument, fast. They are communicating. This is the trait I predicted. They are a hive mind. The individuals are just nodes. A frontal assault will be like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. We have to find the central consciousness. The core. He's right. Pumpkin whispered, her hand on her head. I can feel them. They're not hostile. Of course they're not hostile. They're weak. Zucchini roared, his patience completely gone. And who cares if they're a hive mind? We'll just kill every last one of them. Less thinking, more blasting. That's my final order. He raised his hand, a sphere of crimson ki gathering in his palm. The Sylvans' collective emotional projection shifted from curiosity to a sudden, sharp spike of sadness, confusion, fear. It was the fear that broke Daikon's tactical detachment. For his entire life, he had processed the universe as a series of data points. Power levels, strategic variables, efficiency ratings. But this was different. This wasn't data. This was a feeling, raw and real, being broadcast directly into his soul by a gentle species about to be annihilated for the crime of existing. And in that moment, he felt a flicker of something he had ruthlessly suppressed his whole life: empathy. A connection to someone other than himself. A desire not just to win, but to protect. Don't do it, Daikon said, stepping forward, placing himself between Zucchini and the silent Sylvans. Zucchini stared at him, his face a mask of utter disbelief, which quickly curdled into incandescent rage. Are you defending them? Are you a traitor, Deku? I am trying to complete the mission efficiently. Daikon lied, falling back on the only language he thought they would understand. Attacking them here now is a mistake. We don't have enough information. I have all the information I need. Zucchini spat. They're weak, we're strong. Now get out of my way, or I'll eradicate you along with them. The ideological chasm between them was now a physical reality. Daikon stood, a boy with a power level of 124, shielding a silent people from a fellow Saiyan crackling with the power of a small army. Lika watched from the side, an amused, cruel smirk on her face, eager to see the runt get vaporized. Pumpkin looked on, her face pale, her fists clenched, torn between her commander's order and the undeniable wrongness of the moment. The psychic wave from the Sylvans changed again. It was now focused on Daikon. It was a feeling of profound, heart-wrenching gratitude. Thank you? You are different. You shine. Zucchini let out a final, furious roar. Fine. Have it your way, traitor! He didn't fire his blast at the Sylvans. He fired it at Daikon. A massive, roaring sphere of red energy shot across the clearing. It was a killing blow, a blast powerful enough to vaporize a creature 100 times stronger than Daikon. Daikon's mind went into overdrive. Blast velocity, 300 meters per second. Energy output, approximately 1,600 units. Impact in 0.2 seconds. Evasion impossible. Direct blocking is fatal. Deflection is the only option. He didn't try to meet the blast with one of his own. That would be like trying to stop a tidal wave with a garden hose. Instead, he brought his hands up, his meager blue ki flaring to life. He didn't push against the blast. He cupped his hands and, at the last possible nanosecond, angled them, turning his body with the impact. It was a technique he had practiced in his mind 1,000 times, a theory based on fluid dynamics. Don't fight the current. Redirect it. The crimson energy sphere slammed into his hands. The force was unimaginable, shattering the bones in his forearms and sending searing agony through his entire nervous system. But his angle was perfect. Instead of absorbing the blast, he deflected it. The massive energy ball careened off his hands and shot harmlessly into the sky, exploding high in the upper atmosphere with a deafening boom that shook the entire forest. Daikon collapsed to his knees, his arms useless, blackened, and broken. He coughed up blood, his body screaming from the strain. He had survived. Zucchini, Lika, and Pumpkin stared, their jaws slack. They hadn't witnessed an act of power. They had witnessed an act of impossible skill. A flea had just redirected a wrecking ball. How? Zucchini stammered, his rage momentarily forgotten, replaced by sheer, dumbfounded shock. Before Daikon could answer, before anyone could move, Lika, who had been lazily scanning the sky, suddenly stiffened. Hey, what is that? Zucchini tore his eyes away from Daikon and looked up. Pumpkin did the same. Daikon, through a haze of pain, forced his head up to look as well. It was a pinprick of light in the distant, alien sky. A new star, burning with impossible brightness, in the direction of their home system. It flared brighter and brighter, a silent, terrible sun that for a moment outshone everything else. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. A split second later, all 4 of their scouters let out a simultaneous, deafening shriek of static and then went dead. The connection to the Saiyan military network, to their home, to everything they had ever known, was severed. The clearing was silent, save for the alien birdsong and Daikon's ragged breathing. Zucchini stood frozen, his half-formed ki blast forgotten. Lika floated down from the sky, her arrogant smirk gone, replaced by a look of confusion. Pumpkin was trembling, her eyes wide with a fear far greater than any she had felt before. Daikon, on his knees, his body broken, looked at that empty patch of sky where a star had just blazed. His analytical mind, even through the agony, was putting the pieces together. The location, the energy signature, too focused, too instantaneous for a natural phenomenon like a supernova. The sudden loss of contact. King Vegeta's suppressed rage. Frisia's paranoia. He knew. With a certainty that was as cold and hard as the void of space, he knew exactly what he had just witnessed. It's gone, he rasped, his voice choked with blood and sorrow. Planet Vegeta, it's gone. Silence descended upon the clearing in the glowing forest, a silence so profound it was a physical weight. The alien birdsong, which had moments before been a vibrant chorus, seemed to have faded into a respectful hush. The gentle, psychic hum of the Sylvans was a quiet thrum of shared shock and sorrow, a stark contrast to the violent turmoil raging within the 4 Saiyans. The light in the sky was gone. The star that had flared with impossible, planet-killing brilliance had vanished, leaving behind nothing but the placid, turquoise heavens of C-53. But its afterimage was seared into their minds, a terrible, final punctuation mark at the end of their history. Their scouters were dead. Not just disconnected, but completely inert. The single red lens on each of their faces was now a dark, lifeless void. For a race that had become utterly dependent on the devices for communication, navigation, and the quantification of their entire existence through power levels, it was like being struck deaf, dumb, and blind all at once. They were adrift. Zucchini stood frozen, his hand still raised, the residual crimson energy of his aborted ki blast flickering and dying around his fingertips. His face, usually a mask of brutish confidence, was slack with disbelief. He stared at the empty sky, his mouth slightly agape, as if he could will the familiar star of their home system back into existence through sheer stubbornness. What was that? He finally managed to say, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that was utterly alien coming from him. The usual booming arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, naked confusion. Lika landed softly on the forest floor, her usual grace absent. Her movements were stiff, her face pale. "Our scouters are down," she stated, the words flat and obvious. "All of them. The entire network. It's gone," Daikon rasped again, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. He was still on his knees, his broken arms hanging uselessly at his sides, his body screaming in protest. The pain was a distant roar, overshadowed by the cold, terrifying clarity of his thoughts. "Planet Vegeta, it's all gone." "Shut up, Deku!" Zucchini finally snapped, the familiar anger returning as a defense mechanism against the encroaching terror. He whirled on Daikon, his eyes wild. "What do you know?" It was a solar flare, a supernova. Something. He was grasping at straws, trying to find a natural, understandable explanation for an event that felt fundamentally unnatural. The energy signature was too concentrated for a stellar phenomenon, Daikon countered, his voice gaining a chilling certainty. He forced himself to his feet, swaying with the effort, his body a symphony of agony. He refused to show weakness now. Not when the truth was the most important weapon they had. It was instantaneous, a single, focused burst of energy powerful enough to overcome a planetary mass. That's not a star dying. That's a star being murdered. Before Zucchini could retaliate, a new sound cut through the silence. A high-pitched, electronic beep. It came from Zucchini's armor. A small, secondary communication device embedded in his chestplate, a direct link to the Frisia Force Command ship in their sector, began to flash with a green light. It was a relic, an emergency backup system rarely used. Zucchini fumbled with the device, his thick fingers clumsy with a mixture of hope and dread. He pressed the activation stud. A crackle of static filled the air, and then a voice, smooth and reptilian, echoed through the clearing. It was the voice of Chui, one of Frisia's elite commanders. "Attention all active Saiyan units," the voice announced, its tone professionally detached, almost bored. "This is a fleet-wide broadcast from the command vessel of the mighty Lord Frisia. It is with great regret that we must inform you of a tragic celestial event." A wave of relief washed over Zucchini's face. An official report. An explanation. It would be okay. Approximately 10 minutes ago, a colossal meteor, traveling at near light speeds, struck the Saiyan home world, planet Vegeta, the voice continued. The impact was catastrophic, resulting in the complete and instantaneous destruction of the planet and all its inhabitants. There were no survivors. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. A meteor. A random, meaningless act of cosmic violence. Pumpkin let out a choked sob, her hands flying to her mouth. Her broad shoulders, usually a sign of her physical strength, now shook with a grief so profound it seemed to steal the very air from her lungs. Her family, her friends, everyone she had ever known, reduced to a line in a Frisia Force incident report. Lika stumbled back a step, her face ashen. Her arrogance shattered like glass, replaced by a hollow, vacant stare. The universe, which she had seen as her playground to conquer, had just demonstrated how utterly insignificant she was. Zucchini sank to his knees, not unlike Daikon had moments before. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the loss hit him like a physical blow. He didn't cry. His face contorted into a mask of pure, undiluted rage, a fury born of utter helplessness. His people, the strongest warrior race in the universe, wiped out by a stray rock. It was an insult. A cosmic joke. A dishonorable, pathetic end to a proud history. His aura began to flare around him, a violent, uncontrolled explosion of grief and rage, scorching the grass and causing the nearby glowing trees to flicker. Lord Frisia himself is devastated by this tragic loss, Chui's voice droned on, a layer of false sympathy slathered over the cold, hard announcement. He considered the Saiyans his most valued servants. His sorrow is immense. All surviving Saiyan personnel are hereby ordered to rendezvous at Frisia Planet 79 for reassignment and grief counseling. Follow the Prince. Prince Vegeta, who was fortunately off-world during the incident, will be assuming command of the remaining Saiyan forces under the benevolent guidance of Lord Frisia. Long live the Frisia Force. End transmission. The broadcast clicked off. The clearing was once again plunged into silence, now filled with the sound of Pumpkin's weeping and the crackle of Zucchini's raging aura. A meteor. It was a perfect lie. It was simple, believable, and absolved Frisia of any responsibility. It allowed him to play the part of the grieving benefactor, gathering the scattered, traumatized survivors under his wing. It was neat, tidy, and Daikon knew, with every fiber of his being, that it was utterly false. He looked at his squadmates, each lost in their own personal hell. He saw their grief, their rage, their despair, and he knew that if he didn't act now, if he didn't pierce the veil of this lie, they would walk willingly into the abattoir. It wasn't a meteor. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the haze of their grief like a razor. Zucchini's head snapped up, his eyes burning with red-hot fury. "What did you say, you piece of filth? Are you deaf? You heard the report." "I heard a lie," Daikon said, his voice gaining strength, fueled by a cold, righteous anger of his own. He took a painful step forward, his broken body protesting with every inch. "A carefully constructed lie designed to pacify us. To keep us in line. And what would you know?" Lika spat, her voice trembling but sharp with its old venom. "What makes you the expert, Deku?" "My eyes," Daikon replied, his gaze unwavering as he met hers. "And my mind. Before we left, I saw Frisia's mother ship in high orbit over planet Vegeta. Not a standard destroyer. His personal command vessel. Why was he there, observing? And the light we saw, a meteor impact causes a planetary-scale explosion, a diffusion of energy. What we saw was a focus point of light that grew, a sphere of energy. It's the signature of a supernova-class energy attack, like the kind Frisia is famous for." He turned his attention to Zucchini, whose aura was still raging. "Think, Zucchini! You of all people should understand this. Our race, we are constantly growing stronger. Every battle we survive, we get a Zenkai boost. Our potential is limitless. Frisia knows this. He's been terrified of the Super Saiyan legend for decades. We were becoming too strong, too numerous. We weren't a tool anymore. We were a threat. A meteor is random. This was an extermination." Every word was a hammer blow against the foundation of their worldview. It was a truth so monstrous, so profoundly unthinkable, that their minds instinctively recoiled from it. Their master, the being they had served, the source of their technology, and their place in the galaxy, had betrayed them on the most fundamental level imaginable. "No," Pumpkin whispered, shaking her head, her tears streaming down her face. "No, that's impossible. Why would he? We were loyal. Loyalty from a dog is expected. Loyalty from a wolf is a liability," Daikon said, his voice laced with a grim finality. He didn't want loyal warriors. He wanted obedient slaves, and when he decided we were no longer obedient enough, he put us down. Zucchini surged to his feet, his massive frame shaking with a rage that was now aimed squarely at Daikon. "Lies. You're spitting poison, trying to divide us. Prince Vegeta is alive. He's with Frisia. He would know. He would never serve the one who destroyed our people. He would fight. He would get revenge, would he?" Daikon shot back, his voice rising for the first time. "Prince Vegeta is the embodiment of Saiyan pride. Do you think he would admit to the rest of the universe that his people were wiped out like insects by a superior power? That our entire race was nothing more than Frisia's disposable pets? Or would he swallow the lie, bide his time, and hold on to what little power he has left as a commander in Frisia's army? Pride is his weakness, Zucchini. Frisia knows this. He's counting on it." Daikon's words painted a picture of a cage built not of bars, but of their own psychology. A prison of pride, grief, and a desperate need for a familiar chain of command in a universe that had suddenly become terrifyingly empty. The Sylvans, who had remained silent and still throughout the entire ordeal, began to move. They approached the four Saiyans, their internal lights pulsing with a soft, empathetic rhythm. They didn't offer words of comfort. They offered a feeling. A projection of shared grief, of understanding, of a sorrow that transcended species. One of them, taller than the rest, reached out a slender, three-fingered hand and gently touched Pumpkin's shoulder. The wave of pure, undiluted compassion that flowed from it was so powerful that Pumpkin's weeping subsided into shuddering breaths. She looked at the alien creature, her enemy, and for the first time, saw not a target, but a fellow being. This act of kindness, however, was the final straw for Zucchini. His grief, confusion, and rage finally found a target it could understand. "Get away from her!" he roared, batting the Sylvan's hand away. "Don't touch her, you filthy!" He powered up, his aura exploding outwards, sending a shockwave that flattened the grass and sent the Sylvan stumbling backward. "This is all your fault. This stupid planet. This stupid mission. If we hadn't been sent to this worthless mudball, we would have been home. We would have fought. We would have died with our people." His logic was broken, the desperate rationalization of a shattered mind. He needed someone to blame, someone to hit. And the peaceful, defenseless creatures in front of him were the perfect target. "I'm going to finish this mission," he snarled, his eyes glowing with unshed tears and murderous intent. "I'm going to wipe every last one of you off the face of this planet. It's the last order I ever got, and I'm going to follow it." He raised his hand again, a ki blast forming, larger and more unstable than before. The Sylvans recoiled, their psychic presence a chorus of pure terror. "Zucchini, no!" Pumpkin cried out, horrified. But Zucchini was beyond reason. He was a cornered animal, lashing out at anything and everything. This was it. The moment of schism. Daikon knew that what happened next would define not just their survival, but what kind of survivors they would become. Would they cling to the old ways, the blind rage and destruction that had ultimately led to their demise? Or would they choose something new? His body was a wreck. His arms were shattered, his energy reserves were almost non-existent, and the pain was a constant, blinding fire. But his mind was clear. His purpose was absolute. "Lika." "Pumpkin," Daikon said, his voice cutting through Zucchini's rage. He didn't look at Zucchini. He looked at the two women who were the heart of this decision. "Look at him. That is what Frisia wants us to be. Mindless, raging animals, lashing out at the nearest target, too consumed by our own pain to see the real enemy. That is the path of a slave, the path of a tool that doesn't know it's about to be discarded." He took another agonizing step, planting his feet firmly on the ground. "But I am offering you another path. A path of survival. A path of freedom. We run. We hide. We train. We get stronger, not just in power, but smarter. We learn from our race's mistakes. And one day, when we are strong enough, we will make Frisia pay for what he did. Not for glory, not for pride, but for justice." He finally turned his gaze to Zucchini. "Your path leads to Frisia Planet 79, where you will be given a new collar and a new set of orders, and you will serve the monster who murdered our families until he decides you are no longer useful. My path leads to vengeance. Real vengeance." Lika stared at him, her sharp mind, for the first time, truly seeing past the Deku persona. She saw the logic in his words, the terrifying, undeniable truth. To follow Vegeta was to accept the lie, to bend the knee. It was safe. It was familiar. But it was also a cage. The thought of serving Frisia, of pretending to be his loyal dog after he had just butchered her entire world, was a violation of her very being. Pumpkin looked from Zucchini's twisted, grieving face to Daikon's battered but resolute one. She looked at the terrified Sylvans, who had shown her more compassion in 5 minutes than most Saiyans had in her entire life. Zucchini's rage was an inferno, but Daikon's quiet determination was a shield. One path was destruction. The other felt like a chance at something more. "Choose," Daikon said, his voice low and firm. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken possibilities. The fate of this tiny, fractured remnant of the Saiyan race hung in the balance, in a glowing alien forest, light years from the dust and echoes of their home. "He's a traitor!" Zucchini bellowed, trying to reclaim control. "He's weak. I am your leader. We will follow the prince." Lika looked at Zucchini's raging form, then at Daikon's broken one. One was the past, the other a terrifying, uncertain future. With a soft hiss of energy, she levitated a few inches off the ground, a silent declaration. She drifted over to stand behind Daikon. "The weak one seems to be the only one making any sense," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I would rather die free than live as his pet." Zucchini's face contorted in disbelief and betrayal. Lika! He then turned his desperate, furious gaze to his last loyal soldier. Pumpkin! Don't listen to them. We are Saiyans. We fight. Pumpkin looked at her hands, then at the Sylvan who had touched her. She took a deep, shuddering breath, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. She shook her head. No, she whispered. We die. That's what we do. All we ever do is fight and die. Maybe he's right. Maybe it's time to try something different. She walked, her steps heavy but certain, and took her place beside Lika, behind the broken boy who was now their unlikely leader. Zucchini was alone. Betrayed. Abandoned. His entire world had been destroyed, and now his own squad had turned on him, seduced by the poisonous words of the weakest among them. The grief, the rage, the betrayal, it was too much. His mind snapped. Traitors! He screamed, his voice cracking with anguish. All of you! If you won't serve the prince, if you won't honor our people, then you will die with these freaks. He didn't aim at the Sylvans. He didn't aim at Daikon. He aimed at the sky. He poured every last ounce of his grief, his rage, and his power into a single, massive energy ball. It grew and grew, a miniature sun of malevolent crimson energy, crackling with instability. If I can't go home, then no one can! He shrieked. I'll destroy this whole cursed planet. Daikon's eyes widened in horror. It was a planet buster. A suicide attack. Zucchini was going to take them all with him. They couldn't outrun the blast radius. They couldn't counter it. Their journey, their new path, was about to end before it could even begin. The clearing was lit by a malevolent, crimson sun. Zucchini's planet buster attack hung in the air above him, a monstrous sphere of crackling, unstable energy that pulsed with his grief and rage. It grew with every passing second, draining the color from the glowing forest, casting long, dancing shadows that looked like grasping claws. The very air vibrated with its power, a low, guttural hum that promised total annihilation. I'll kill you all! Zucchini shrieked, his face a twisted mask of despair, tears streaming from his eyes and evaporating in the intense heat of his own attack. Traitors! Cowards! You'll die with me! He was no longer a soldier. He was a supernova of pain, ready to collapse and take the entire system with him. Lika and Pumpkin were frozen, paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming scale of the threat. This wasn't a ki blast they could dodge or counter. It was a judgment. Lika, the speedster, knew she could never move fast enough to escape the planet's destruction. Pumpkin, the powerhouse, knew her strongest shield would be less than paper against this cataclysm. They had made their choice, and this was to be their reward, a swift, meaningless death at the hands of one of their own. But Daikon's mind, even in the face of oblivion, did not stop working. Panic was an inefficient emotion. He analyzed. Threat, Class C planetary destruction event. Energy output, unstable, but exceeding 1.8 million units and climbing. Time to detonation, estimated 7 seconds. Evasion/survival probability, 0.001%. Direct countermeasure viability 0. My physical state is critical. Arms are shattered. Ki reserves are at 3%. Lika and Pumpkin are in shock. Their combined power is insufficient to negate the blast. The logical conclusion was simple. They were all going to die. But logic had failed him before. It had told him he couldn't survive Zucchini's first blast, yet he had. There was always another variable, another path, however narrow. His eyes darted around the clearing, not looking at the monstrous energy ball, but at everything else. The trees. The ground. The enemy. He found it. A single, desperate, insane variable. Zucchini's mental state, critical. He is emotionally compromised, his focus entirely on fueling the attack. He is a conduit, not a controller. His own physical defense is at its absolute lowest. He is a glass cannon with a nuclear warhead. There was an opening. Not in the attack, but in the attacker. Lika! Daikon's voice was a blade, sharp and clear, cutting through the paralyzing fear. Full speed! Target his neck! Don't try to kill him, just break his concentration. The order was so precise, so utterly contrary to the instinct to flee or cower, that it jolted Lika from her stupor. It was an impossible command, get closer to the bomb, but it was a command nonetheless. It was a plan. In a world that had just dissolved into chaos, a plan was an anchor. She didn't question it. With a scream that was equal parts terror and defiance, she exploded from her position, a silver blur of motion. "Pumpkin!" Daikon barked, his voice straining. "Give me everything you have! Not a blast! A shield! Focus it on me! Now!" Pumpkin, too, was shocked into action. Tears still streamed down her face, but the terrified girl was gone, replaced by the Saiyan warrior. She roared, her powerful golden aura flaring to life, and threw her hands forward. Not to attack Zucchini, but to follow the insane order of their broken leader. A translucent, honeycomb barrier of pure ki materialized in front of Daikon. Zucchini saw Lika's movement from the corner of his eye. "Stay back!" he howled, trying to swat her away with his free hand, but his focus was irrevocably split. The planet buster wavered, the hum of its power fluctuating for a single, critical moment. That was all Daikon needed. He couldn't use his arms. They were mangled, useless appendages. But he had his legs. He had his mind. And he had a theory. Pouring the last dregs of his own energy into his feet, he kicked off the ground. It was a clumsy, painful launch, but Pumpkin's shield, instead of blocking him, acted as a focused energy conduit. It absorbed his momentum and repelled him forward like a magnetic accelerator, a technique he theorized but never dared attempt. He shot through the air, a broken arrow aimed at the heart of the storm. Time seemed to slow down. He saw Lika's fist connect with the side of Zucchini's neck. It wasn't a powerful blow, she had pulled it at the last second, as ordered, but the shock was enough. Zucchini's head snapped to the side, his eyes losing focus. His connection to the massive energy sphere above him severed. The planet buster, now untethered from its creator, began to collapse. It imploded, shrinking with terrifying speed, its crimson light shifting to a blinding, pure white. Daikon was right in its path. He twisted his body, his legs coiled beneath him. He couldn't use a ki blast. But he could use his body as a projectile, his mind as the guidance system. This was his own, desperate version of a suicide attack, a final gamble. Targeting solution, the epicenter of the collapsing energy sphere. Apply focused kinetic force to the weakest point of the energy matrix. Goal, not to destroy, but to destabilize. To force the detonation vector upwards, away from the planet's surface. With a final, ragged yell that tore from his throat, he kicked. His legs, powered by his last ounce of ki and the momentum from Pumpkin's shield, slammed into the heart of the imploding white sun. The universe became pure, silent, white light. The detonation was not the ground-shaking explosion they had feared. It was a directed blast, a focused pillar of incandescent energy that shot straight up into the heavens. It punched a hole through the atmosphere of C-53, a searing white spear that lanced into the void of space. The shockwave that followed was not an expanding sphere, but a colossal ring that spread out horizontally. It flattened every glowing tree in the clearing, ripped the ground asunder, and sent all four Scions tumbling through the air like discarded dolls. Then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. Silence returned. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and vaporized flora. The clearing was now a barren, blackened crater, miles wide. At its center, a single, deep scar was burned into the planet's crust, pointing to the sky. Daikon lay in the dirt, unconscious, his body broken in a dozen new ways. Lika and Pumpkin were scattered nearby, battered and bruised but miraculously alive. Zucchini was slumped against the rim of the crater, his energy completely depleted, his mind blessedly empty, his body alive but his spirit extinguished. The Sylvans were gone, having either fled or been vaporized in the initial shockwave. But the planet, C-53, had survived. It was a victory, but it felt like a funeral. Daikon awoke to the sensation of gentle, cool energy flowing over his skin. It was a soothing balm on the fire of his injuries. He opened his eyes. He was in a cave behind a waterfall, the sound of cascading water a constant, calming murmur. The light was dim, filtered through the curtain of water, and it cast dancing patterns on the stone walls. Pumpkin was kneeling beside him, her hands glowing with a soft, green aura as she tended to his wounds. Her healing technique was crude, far less refined than a trained medic's, but it was filled with a gentle, focused intent. He could see the exhaustion etched on her face. "Your arms. I set the bones, but they were shattered," she said, her voice soft. "It will be a while before you can even make a fist." Daikon slowly sat up, testing his limbs. The pain was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but the sharp, stabbing agony was gone. His body was already beginning its Saiyan healing process, amplified by Pumpkin's efforts. He looked around the cave. Lika was sitting near the entrance, staring out through the waterfall, her expression grim and unreadable. Zucchini was slumped in the darkest corner, bound by makeshift ropes of thick vine, his head bowed in a catatonic stupor. "How long was I out?" Daikon asked, his voice raspy. 2 days, Pumpkin replied. "Lika found this place. It's defensible. The water masks our energy signatures." "Zucchini?" Pumpkin glanced over at their former leader. "He hasn't said a word. He just sits there. The fight, it broke him. He put everything he had into that blast. There's nothing left." Daikon nodded slowly, processing the new reality. Their squad of 4 was now a fractured trio and a prisoner. They were stranded on a hostile world, fugitives from the most powerful empire in the universe, and their only link to their past was a broken man who had tried to murder them all. He looked at Pumpkin, truly looked at her. The anxious, uncertain girl was gone. In her place was a young woman with weary but steady eyes. She had faced the end of her world, the betrayal of her commander, and the near destruction of a planet, and she was still here, still fighting, still healing. "You did well, Pumpkin," he said, the words simple but filled with a sincerity she had never heard from another Saiyan. "Your shield, my plan would have failed without it." A faint blush crept up her neck. She looked away, unused to praise. I just did what you said. You followed a logical but terrifying order in the face of certain death," Daikon corrected gently. "That isn't obedience. That's courage." From the cave entrance, Lika spoke, her voice sharp as ever, but lacking its usual arrogant bite. "Don't start braiding each other's hair just yet. We have a problem." She turned, her face a mask of grim urgency. "I've been scouting. Long range. There's a ship in orbit." Daikon's blood ran cold. "Frisia Force? Worse." Lika spat, the single word dripping with a history of ingrained rivalry and contempt. "It's a Scion attack ball. A royal model." The implication was immediate and terrifying. "Follow the prince." Shui's broadcast echoed in Daikon's mind. Vegeta was here. The atmosphere in the cave became suffocating. Vegeta's arrival changed the equation completely. Frisia was a distant, monolithic threat. Vegeta was personal. He was the living embodiment of the society that had rejected them, the symbol of the pride that had led their race to ruin, and for Daikon, he was the ghost of every beating, every humiliation, every jeering chant of "Deku, what does he want?" Pumpkin asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Us," Lika answered grimly. "He's come for the strays. To bring us back into the fold, back to Frisia. Or to eliminate us as loose ends. He's following orders." Daikon murmured, his mind already racing, piecing together the new strategic puzzle. Frisia can't have a rogue element of science out in the galaxy, spreading the truth about what happened. He needs to control the narrative, so he sends the prince, the one person surviving science are most likely to trust, to clean up the mess. "So what do we do?" Pumpkin asked, looking at Daikon. The question was not one of a subordinate to a commander, but of a survivor to her anchor. "We can't fight him." "Lika, you've seen him. What's his power level?" Lika shook her head, a flicker of something close to fear in her eyes. "I didn't need a scouter. I could feel it, even from the ground. It's monstrous. He could wipe out all of us without breaking a sweat, and he's not alone. There's another, larger signature with him. Nappa, probably." The situation was dire. They were injured, exhausted, and hopelessly outclassed. Their only advantages were their location and the element of surprise. "We have to make a choice," Daikon said, his voice steady, a rock in the churning sea of their fear. He looked at Lika, then at Pumpkin, his emerald eyes holding theirs. The same choice we made before. We can surrender. We can go with Vegeta, accept Frieza's lie, and live as slaves. Or we can fight for our freedom. You said it yourself, we can't beat him. Lika shot back, her pragmatism warring with her pride. I didn't say we had to beat him. Daikin corrected. I said we had to fight. Fighting doesn't always mean winning. Sometimes it means surviving. It means living to fight another day. He pushed himself to his feet, wincing as his battered body protested. He walked towards the cave entrance, standing beside Lika to look out through the shimmering veil of the waterfall. Vegeta has a critical weakness, Daikin said, his voice dropping to its familiar analytical cadence. It's the same weakness our entire race had. Pride. He will not expect a strategic retreat. He will not expect subterfuge. He will expect a head-on battle, a challenge of power. He will expect us to fight like Saiyans. So we will not. He turned to face them, a plan already crystallizing in his mind, forged in the fires of logic and desperation. Here's what we do. Phase 1 is misdirection. Lika, you're the fastest. I need you to create a diversion on the other side of the continent. A large, flashy energy signature, something that looks like a challenge. Draw them away from here. Make them think we're preparing for a final stand. Lika's eyes lit up with a dangerous gleam. Deception and speed. This was a plan she could appreciate. I can do that. Phase 2 is acquisition. Daikin continued, his gaze shifting to the back of the cave. Our attack ball is a wreck. But theirs is pristine. While they are distracted by Lika, Pumpkin and I will infiltrate their landing site. Our objective is not to fight. It is to steal their ship. Pumpkin's jaw dropped. Steal the prince's ship? That's insane. It's a calculated risk. Daikin countered. Insanity would be facing him in open combat. He will leave his ship guarded, but the guard will not be Vegeta himself. It will be Nappa. Nappa is powerful, but he is a sledgehammer. He is predictable. Overconfident. We can outsmart him. The plan was audacious. It was borderline suicidal. But it was also brilliant. It played to their strengths. Lika's speed, Pumpkin's power for a focused strike, and Daikin's mind, while exploiting the enemy's arrogance. And Zucchini? Pumpkin asked, her gaze falling on the pathetic, huddled figure in the corner. Daikin's expression hardened. It was a difficult variable. Zucchini was a danger, a liability. But he was also one of the last living members of their species. He was a Saiyan. We take him with us, Daikin said, his voice leaving no room for argument. We don't leave anyone behind. Not anymore. The decision was made. The die was cast. For the next hour, they prepared. Daikin, his arms still useless, dictated his plan in meticulous detail, drawing diagrams in the dirt with a sharp stone held between his toes. He outlined Nappa's fighting style from memory, pointing out his blind spots, his attack patterns, the tells that preceded his most powerful blasts. He gave Lika a precise flight path that would maximize her energy signature while keeping her at a safe distance. He drilled Pumpkin on a specific, short-range, high-impact key blast designed to disable, not destroy. As they prepared to leave, Daikin approached Zucchini. The large Saiyan didn't look up. He was just a hollow shell. Zucchini, Daikin said softly. We are leaving. We are taking you with us. I don't know if you can hear me, but I need you to know this. I do not forgive you for what you tried to do, but I understand why you did it. You were grieving. You were afraid. We all were. The path you chose was the wrong one. We are choosing a different path now. Maybe one day you'll be able to walk it with us. There was no response. With a heavy sigh, Pumpkin and Lika hoisted the unresponsive Zucchini between them. The three fugitives stood at the mouth of the cave, the roar of the waterfall a thunderous drumbeat for the battle to come. They were no longer Squad 734 of the Saiyan army. They were something new, a broken, desperate, and defiant remnant, led by a boy named Deku who had just declared war on his own prince, and the most powerful tyrant in the cosmos. Ready? Daikin asked, his emerald eyes scanning the faces of his new comrades. Lika gave a sharp, confident nod. Her fear had been replaced by a fierce, predatory excitement. Pumpkin took a deep breath and nodded, her expression resolute. Her anxiety had been forged into determination. "Let's go," Daikon said. They burst through the waterfall, 3 streaks of energy splitting off into the alien sky. One, a silver comet, shot towards the horizon, a beacon of false defiance. The other 2, a golden warrior and a broken analyst, flew low and fast through the canyons, cloaking their energy, ghosts on a mission to commit the ultimate act of treason. They were no longer just survivors, they were rebels. They were fugitives of the Force, and their war for survival had just begun.